The Morning Majority on 630 WMAL.
7:07 on the Morning Majority. Brian Neiman, Tony Blankley, Mary Walter in this morning. Do have some news on the Air Force F-15 Strike Eagle that crashed in Libya, I guess, overnight. U.S. military is saying that both crew members ejected. One was safely recovered, and the military on a mission to recover the other one, and they do not believe that the plane was shot down. Mechanical problems apparently brought it down. So we'll also get into whether you are bothered that the U.S. is not leading in Libya. There are some Republicans that are certainly bothered by that. We'll take your calls after traffic and weather together. We'll do that in about 10 minutes. We're pleased to be joined now by MARC GINSBERG, former ambassador to Morocco, former advisor to President Carter, legislative assistant to Ted Kennedy. Mr. Ambassador, good to have you on the show.
Good morning.
How do you think this rollout was handled by the administration? Essentially not talking about it on a national television address, enforcing the no-fly zone. The communication with Congress doesn't seem like it was handled well. There doesn't seem to be a clear, defined mission. They say it's humanitarian. It's not necessarily to knock out Gaddafi. How do you think this has been handled so far?
Well, my biggest concern is the fact that the president's goals and the military's assessment of what those goals are completely different. They're not on the same page. And not only that, on a multilateral basis, the French seem to be pulling us deeper and deeper into Libya when the UN Security Council resolution merely calls for us to provide humanitarian support, whereas the French would like to get rid of Gaddafi, which they are actually determined to do, and use our Air Force to accomplish that goal. I'm much more concerned about that than I am about the so-called rollout.
Mr. Ambassador, Tony Blankley here. I'd be interested in your assessment of what the president has said in distinguishing between his political objective, he said, of getting rid of Gaddafi, and our military objective of merely stopping, killing for humanitarian purposes. It seems to violate Clausewitz's principle that war is politics by other means. Does it make sense to you? Would you advise the president to so separate his political objectives from the military device he has in hand?
Well, listen, Tony, the problem here is that the president spoke out early when the revolt first started in Libya. And getting a multilateral initiative underway that would include the Arab League and to provide the so-called cover of the Arab League to support U.S. and French and British involvement would never permit a overt effort to declare that our goal is to take is to get rid of Gaddafi. So the administration has consistently had to walk the cat back, and moreover, I mean, it's out there in blaring daylight that there's been divisions within this administration. I've never seen anything where everybody is sort of lined up as if this is a bracket in March Madness as to which side was on what side in terms of whether or not to involve the United States or not.
Yeah, Mr. Ambassador, as far as is the message, since you were just talking about the message and how this administration seems to just be scattered and no one's on the same page, that definitely comes across to the American people. The fact that the president made this announcement while in Brazil, and now he gave a speech yesterday from Chile, it just seems to come across as there's no gravity to this situation, and it seems to be almost like a laid back. It doesn't just seem to be, as I said, gravity to the situation that I think comes across. Is this a mistake on their part?
Well, listen, it's quite clear that what the White House made a conscious decision to do was to attempt, whether it succeeds or not, and obviously by your question it's not helping with you, to create this perception that the United States is playing a back seat to what's going on here.
Okay.
This is really the French and the British and the Arab League and what have you that's leading the charge. Well, you and I know, and anybody who is following our military analysts know, that the United States is the major party that's involved in providing the air defense for accomplishing the goal. So the president's efforts to try to politically convince the American public that we are only in a backseat mode here is inconsistent with what's happening on the ground.
Let me ask you, Mr. Ambassador, as you know, Sarkozy, who has cheerfully thrust himself forward, there's a lot of talk that he's doing it in part for domestic reasons. He's down to 31% approval. His party lost a by-election. To what extent is he going to try to drive for domestic French reasons our policy, and do you think we will succumb to letting him genuinely lead?
I think you've hit the nail on the head, and this is what I've been probably most concerned about. Sarkozy has intramural political problems with his European allies over his goal to create a Mediterranean Union. He tried to shove this down the throats of his European allies, and they rejected it. And he sees the Libyan equation as the opportunity for the French to reassert what essentially is a French hat over the Mediterranean and resurrect this idea of a Mediterranean Union, cloaked in his desire to rid the region of Gaddafi. And so we have to be very careful of being drawn into Sarkozy's own grand designs for France and the Mediterranean.
Well, you mentioned that the French want Gaddafi gone. The president and our leaders in the military have said we can have this mission with Gaddafi still staying in power. If the French want him gone, how are they going to get to that final point, especially since Secretary Gates said yesterday that we're going to take the back seat in this and we're not putting boots on the ground?
Well, this is always, of course, the challenge of multilateralism. When you already have questions within the Arab League, to the extent that the Arab League was an Arab League that was cohesive here, and the British clearly have a far different interpretation over what this mission should be from us, and the French may be wanting to go the whole 9 yards. And this is why I have serious questions over how we arrived at the decision to basically support a UN resolution where everybody has their own interpretation over the all necessary means clause to accomplish a humanitarian goal.
If there was division within the administration, I completely agree with you on that. Who was the one who convinced the president that this was the right move?
Well, by all indications, it seems that Secretary Clinton was the one who, after meeting with the representatives of the Libyan opposition, threw her weight behind involving the United States militarily to support a no-fly zone, because the president himself, while having a political reason to want to get rid of Gaddafi, which frankly I find hard to believe that anyone would oppose, she was the one who threw her considerable weight behind the White House, where in effect I guess there was a vote in the National Security Council, and the majority won.
Mr. Ambassador, this is a question that you can't know absolutely, but is it your sense that the decision-making process in the administration was one where the president was seeking out the firmer judgments of his different people, but made the decision, or where he was being driven to a decision more passively by the more powerful forces within his administration?
I really don't know. I have enormous respect for his national security advisor, Tom Donilon, who's trying to navigate all of this between the Pentagon and the people inside the national security staff who...
he was against it, right?
He was, at least according to the newspapers, he was against it. Yeah. Because I think he realized that the Pentagon was not fully on board on this. So, look, I think the biggest problem I have is that the dirty laundry of this decision has been used by people who have opposed the president's stance as a way of showing that the divisions within the administration are now appearing on the ground in terms of what exactly our goals and objectives are. And that, from my own perspective, I'd like to see us always act in a way that appears to be at least have the full faith and credit of the president behind the decision.
All right, Mr. Ambassador, great to have you on the show. We appreciate your time and your insights.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
MARC GINSBERG, former ambassador of Morocco, presidential advisor to Jimmy Carter, also assistant legislative assistant to Ted Kennedy.